The moment I discovered they'd been reading my private messages was so surreal, my brain almost refused to process it at first. You know that feeling when you see something so wrong, your mind needs a few seconds to catch up to what your eyes are showing you? It was exactly like that. It was a Tuesday night. Chloe was in the shower, and her iPad was just sitting there on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at her devices. Privacy is something I genuinely believe in, unlike apparently everyone else in her life. But the notification preview was right there, lit up on the lock screen. It said, "Bethany, clip 3 is perfect," classic isolation phrase. My stomach just dropped. I knew exactly what clip 3 was. It was a voice memo I'd sent Chloe 4 days earlier, just a quick message about wanting to book a cabin in Aspen for our anniversary. I picked up the iPad. It unlocked when I angled it, and what I saw next, it made me feel physically sick. I was looking at a group chat called Chloe Support Squad, with 12 members. Every single person from that podcast production team was in it. My hands started shaking as I scrolled up. Months of our private conversations were just sitting there. Screenshot after screenshot of text messages I'd sent her. Photos of us together, with little annotations pointing out my body language. Voice memos I'd recorded when I was too tired to type. All of it dissected and analyzed like I was some kind of criminal suspect. There was the text where I'd said I was working late on a security breach and couldn't make dinner. Underneath it, Bethany had written, "Notice the vague terminology, classic avoidance of real intimacy." There was the message where I'd suggested we save money for a down payment instead of taking an expensive vacation, labeled as financial manipulation, controlling the narrative around their future. There was even a photo from a Saturday morning where I was making breakfast. Apparently, my expression was dismissive because I wasn't smiling enough. Never mind that I'd literally just woken up and hadn't even had coffee yet. Every single normal interaction we'd had for months had been fed into this machine that converted regular relationship moments into evidence of toxicity. But what made it worse? Seeing Chloe's responses in the chat. She'd add context, but always in a way that made me look even worse. She'd write things like, "He says he's tired, but I think he just doesn't want to engage emotionally." Or, "He planned this whole trip without asking what I wanted," when the reality was, I'd literally sent her 3 different cabin options and asked her to pick her favorite. The chat went back 6 months, almost to the exact week she'd started working at the podcast. I could track the change in her language in real time, as she went from defending me, to questioning everything I did, to eventually just accepting their interpretation of my actions without any pushback. There was this one exchange where I texted her during a work meeting, saying I missed her and wished I was home. Just a sweet, normal message. And someone named Sarah had responded in the group chat, love bombing after a period of emotional distance, textbook cycle. And Chloe had replied with a thinking emoji. A thinking emoji, instead of telling them they were insane. I sat there on the couch, reading through months of my life being turned into content for people who seemed to genuinely believe that any man who wasn't performing happiness every second was secretly abusive. The worst part was, I couldn't even be angry. Because anger, well, that would just prove their point, wouldn't it? I heard the shower turn off. I knew I had maybe 2 minutes before Chloe came out. So, I took screenshots of everything, sent them to myself, deleted the sent messages from her iPad, and put it back exactly where it was. My hands were still shaking when she walked into the living room in her bathrobe, asking what I wanted for dinner. I just looked at her and said we needed to talk about privacy and boundaries. I watched her face change into this defensive expression before I'd even explained what I meant. She immediately asked if I'd gone through her phone. I told her no, I saw a notification on her iPad that concerned me. She grabbed it off the table like I'd threatened to smash it. I asked her directly if she'd been sharing our private conversations with the podcast team. She got very still. That stillness told me everything before she even opened her mouth. "They're helping me see patterns I couldn't see on my own," she said. "What patterns, exactly?" I asked. She started listing things in this rehearsed way that sounded nothing like her actual voice. She said I had a habit of making plans without consulting her, that I used work as an excuse to avoid emotional conversations, that I made her feel guilty for spending time with friends. Every single point was something straight out of a podcast episode I'd heard them record. I asked her for specific examples, with dates and contexts. She couldn't give me any. Just kept talking in these broad generalizations about patterns and red flags and things that felt manipulative, even if she couldn't explain why. I told her that sharing my text messages and voice memos with a dozen strangers, without my consent, was an actual violation of privacy. Not just a feeling, but a real thing that actually happened. And she said, "Bethany says your wording is manipulative." Like, that was a response. I just stared at her. In that moment, I realized I wasn't talking to my girlfriend anymore. I was talking to a committee. Every word I said was going to be reported back, analyzed, and used as evidence in a case I didn't even know I was on trial for. She kept going. Told me the group chat was a safe space for her to process her feelings, that I couldn't understand because I'd never been gaslit the way she had in past relationships. I wanted to point out that I'd been there for every story about her difficult ex, had listened and comforted her, and had never once shared those private moments with anyone. But there was no point. She'd already decided that my expectation of basic privacy was just another form of control, another red flag, another reason they were right about me all along. I asked her if she understood that everything I told her in confidence, every vulnerable moment, every private thought, was now entertainment for people who didn't know me and had already decided I was the villain. She said, "They're not strangers. They're my support system." I told her a support system doesn't require screenshots and forensic analysis of text messages. It requires actual conversation and trust. She looked at me with this expression that was pure podcast rhetoric and said, "You're just upset because you can't control the narrative anymore." The conversation went in circles for another 20 minutes. Her speaking in borrowed phrases, and me trying to explain that privacy isn't control. Until finally, I just stopped talking. I realized nothing I said would matter. She'd been marinating in this environment where every man was suspect and every boundary was oppression for so long that she couldn't see how completely insane it was to treat your partner like a research subject. I went to bed that night in the spare room because I couldn't stand to be near her. I lay there in the dark, thinking about how every word I'd said that evening was probably already typed up in that group chat, with commentary about my defensive behavior and inability to take accountability. I thought about all the times I'd comforted her when she was stressed. All the little things I did to make her life easier. All the ways I'd shown up consistently and reliably. And how none of that mattered, because it wasn't performative enough for an audience that needed me to be a villain. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. Around noon, I got a text that just said, "We need to talk." 7 p.m. The copper still. I knew exactly what was coming. You don't schedule a breakup conversation at a public place unless you want witnesses, or you're afraid of the other person's reaction. I texted back sure and spent the rest of the day working from home, finishing up a security audit and making sure my professional life was solid. Because I knew my personal life was about to implode, and I wanted at least one area of stability. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt, really. I was just exhausted. Exhausted from months of being treated like a suspect in my own relationship. Honestly, part of me felt relieved that it was finally going to be over. I showed up at the copper still at 6:55. Being late would obviously be another red flag. Chloe was already there, at a corner table with 3 of her podcast friends sitting at the bar, pretending they weren't watching. I realized this wasn't going to be a conversation at all. It was going to be a performance, with an audience ready to validate whatever she said. I sat down across from Chloe. Immediately, I noticed she had note cards in front of her. Actual physical note cards, like she was about to give a presentation. That's when I really knew this wasn't a real conversation. She started talking before I even ordered a drink, using that same therapy speak voice that had replaced her actual personality. telling me she'd been doing a lot of reflection and realized our relationship had become unhealthy for her growth. I just listened, watching her glance down at the cards every few seconds. When she paused, I asked her to give me one specific example of something unhealthy I'd done. Just one concrete moment, with context. She fumbled through her cards, looking increasingly frustrated. She said things felt wrong and the dynamic was off, and she'd been walking on eggshells. But when I asked when specifically she'd felt that way, she couldn't answer. Just kept circling back to feelings and patterns and things Bethany had helped her identify. I could see her friends at the bar leaning, trying to hear. I realized they'd probably helped write those note cards. Probably spent hours crafting this script for her to follow. She eventually just said what she'd probably planned to say from the start. The line about her friends thinking I limited her. And I felt this weird calm wash over me. Because finally, we were getting to the truth. I asked her if her friends' opinions mattered more than her own experience of our relationship. She said they could see things she couldn't. And that's when I knew. There was no relationship left to save. I looked her dead in the eye. Cool, then go join them. The look on her face was pure shock. Like she'd expected me to beg, or argue, or give her the dramatic scene they'd probably predicted I'd make. Her friends at the bar had gone completely silent, and I could feel them staring. Chloe just sat there, opening and closing her mouth, trying to figure out what to say now that her script hadn't accounted for me just agreeing. I pulled out my wallet, put down $40 for the drinks neither of us had touched, and told her I hoped she found whatever it was she was looking for. Then I stood up, walked past her friends without even glancing at them, and left the copper still feeling lighter than I had in months. The performance was finally over. The next few days were mechanical and efficient, because that's how I handle problems. I make a plan and execute it. I packed up all her stuff from my apartment, every piece of clothing, every book, every random item she'd left scattered around over 2 years. I boxed it all neatly and left it in the building lobby with a text telling her when she could pick it up. I blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform, blocked her friends, blocked anyone associated with that podcast. And I did it all without anger or drama, because I was just done giving them content to analyze. She tried calling from different numbers, I never answered. She sent emails that I deleted without reading. 3 days after the bar, she showed up at my apartment building, but I'd already told the front desk not to let her up. Security called me, and I could hear her in the background saying, "I just want to talk." I told them to inform her that all her belongings were already collected and we had nothing to discuss. A coworker asked me a week later why I seemed so much more relaxed. I realized it was because I wasn't being monitored anymore. Wasn't second-guessing every word I said or every decision I made. Wasn't living in a relationship that had turned into a surveillance state. I started going to the gym again, reconnected with friends I'd been neglecting, picked up a project car I'd been wanting to work on. I just generally remembered what it felt like to exist without someone documenting my every move for an audience of critics. About 2 months after the breakup, my friend sent me a link to a podcast episode titled "When You're the Red Flag." I knew immediately it was about me, even though they didn't use my name. I listened to the whole thing, and it was surreal hearing Chloe describe our relationship as this oppressive situation where I'd controlled her schedule, isolated her from friends, and made her question her own reality. None of which had actually happened. They painted me as this master manipulator who'd been so subtle about my tactics that even I didn't know I was doing it. The comment section was full of people praising Chloe for escaping and calling me every name you can imagine. The thing that bothered me wasn't the lies exactly. It was how many people believed them without question. How ready everyone was to accept that any relationship that ended must have been toxic. And any man who seemed calm must have been hiding something sinister. But here's what they didn't expect. The episode blew up way bigger than their usual content. Suddenly, people who actually knew me started recognizing the story. My company's HR actually reached out after someone sent them the episode, asking if they were aware their employee was being accused of manipulation on a podcast. I had to explain the whole situation, with screenshots of that group chat I'd saved. Former coworkers, mutual friends, even Chloe's own cousin, reached out privately to say they knew the podcast version didn't match reality. And slowly, this counter-narrative started building in the comments, where people pointed out that every example she gave was either completely normal behavior, or didn't actually show what she claimed it showed. The podcast's reputation started taking hits because people went back through old episodes and realized almost every story followed the same pattern of turning regular relationship dynamics into manipulation narratives. Advertisers started quietly pulling out. I didn't participate in any of it. Didn't defend myself publicly or add fuel to the fire. I just let the truth speak for itself while I focused on actually living my life. 6 months after everything imploded, I got an email from Chloe. No subject line, just a message that said, "You weren't toxic. I'm sorry I let them convince me you were." I stared at it for a long time before closing it without responding. What was there to say? Sorry doesn't undo months of violation and betrayal. Doesn't erase the fact that she chose strangers' opinions over her own experience. Doesn't change that she was willing to destroy me to fit into a community that required everyone to have a villain origin story. I'm dating someone new now, a software engineer I met through friends who thinks the whole podcast cult thing is insane. She actually communicates like a real person instead of reading from a script. We have normal disagreements where we talk through problems instead of cataloging them as evidence. And when she tells her friends about me, it's because she wants to share her life, not because she needs them to validate her reality. I learned that when someone turns you into a character in their narrative instead of treating you like a real person, the only move is to walk off their stage and let them perform for an empty room. The podcast eventually got cancelled after multiple sponsors dropped them, and Bethany posted some non-apology about learning and growing. I heard through mutual friends that Chloe left the production company and moved to a different city for a fresh start. I don't hate her, and I don't spend time thinking about revenge. Because honestly, she gave me the greatest gift, which was showing me exactly who not to waste my time on. And now I'm just focused on building a life with someone who sees partnership as collaboration instead of content creation. What do you think about all of this?